Okay, we're back. So I thought we would start with your parents and grandparents, and um, let's start with what you remember about them, or what you can tell me about them.
I don't know too much about my grandparents because the only one that got to North America is my mother's mother, and she lived with us in New Toronto. Um, but she passed away when I was just a couple of years old.
When did she arrive here?
It had to be after the First World War. My parents were married in about 1914.
And where did your that would be your grandma, where did
That
she
was
come
from
from? Like,
Romania.
From Romania.
Yeah. And my mother's sister lived in Detroit, and her brothers, she had three brothers that were here in Toronto.
And so everybody was Romanian by
Yep.
birth.
Yeah,
Okay.
on my mother's side.
On your mother's side.
Now, my father came from Russia, and all his family remained there except for two brothers. The two brothers went to New York City, and we used to go to visit them.
And where do you remember the town or the place that your father
My
was born?
father was born in Minsk,
Hmm.
which is, I don't believe is Russia anymore.
Is that? I thought it was Poland.
No,
That's Russia?
that's my father-in-law. My father was born in Minsk, and my mother was born in Brăila, Romania. I believe it's still a town, or a city now. Everything is big cities now. They were
And-
villages at the time.
So how did they meet each other?
In Toronto,
Oh, well, that's cool.
yeah.
And so they met here, and then obviously married here,
Yeah,
and then started their family.
right. My brother was the first to be born, and they lived in Kensington Market.
Your brother
Which
was
was-
Leonard.
Leonard Dworkin. And that was where all the big majority of Jewish immigrants
Mhm.
settled. And they were there for a number of years.
Do you remember where they lived? Like where in Kensington?
I think it was Ontario Street.
Ontario.
Yeah, but I'm not, it was somewhere in that general
Mm.
area.
And then
I don't know I can't remember whether my sister was born in the same area. My brother was 9 years older than me, and my sister was 7.5 years older. And I was born in New Toronto. My father was employed during the World War. I was born in August the 12th, 1931, which was still part of the Depression era. And my father was fortunate enough to be working for the Canadian National Railways,
Hmm.
and they sent him to New Toronto, which is now Etobicoke. I think we were about the only Jewish family there. And we lived there till I was 5. Then we moved to the city.
so where did you move to then when you came to Toronto proper?
Moved to Crawford Street. And it was a mixed area. A lot of Jewish people, but mixture. One of my best friends was an Irish family who had like 20 kids.
Mhm.
And I went to Gibbons Public School, which was, I don't know, 20-minute walk. So it was a mixed area.
And what do you remember about growing up, like your early years of living
I
in
remember I laughed a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to play outside.
Mhm.
That was,
Yeah.
yeah. And they had a hard time getting us in at night. And then we would listen to the radio.
Mm.
There were a lot of wonderful programs on. There was Lux Presents Hollywood, which was like a mini movie
Hmm.
on the radio.
That was a soap company, Lux?
Yeah,
Not the salmon.
no. No, it was a facial soap or soap, and we watched the Green Hornet.
Did you listen to it?
We listened to. Sorry, we listened to the Green Hornet and the Shadow. Really scary stuff in those days. Yeah, that's what we did for
Entertainment.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about you growing up with your brothers and sisters? Sister?
I don't remember too much about my brother because I was 9 years old when he got married.
Wow.
So.
Which is quite an age difference.
Yeah. And that was just before.
So he would have been 18 when he got married? Because I think you said there was a 9-year.
There is a 9-year difference, but I think it was, he must have been about 19 because they had drafted him into the Second World War. And he was supposed to have a large wedding, but because of the draft, they got married faster, so that he wouldn't have to go overseas immediately, because he was a married man.
So he fought in World War
Two. Yeah.
And he
never actually got overseas.
Okay.
While he was on maneuvers, practicing maneuvers in Canada, he fell off a large walkway or something, injured his back very badly, and wound up in the hospital.
Oh dear.
And was in the hospital for many, many, many months, and then he was discharged.
Probably saved his life in the end, I would think.
Yeah, but he had suffered all his life with back problems. Yeah. And my sister, we shared a room because our house was semi-rented. We had tenants upstairs, and it was a big house. And I know she went to work at an early age. I think she was about 16 when she went to work.
So there was no sort of post-secondary education like kids have today?
I was very anxious to go to a collegiate school and go on to university, but we didn't have the money. And they said, after 5 years of schooling, I would wind up with no trade at all. So they talked me into going to a commercial school where I tried to learn shorthand, could not fathom it at all.
It's like another language.
But I did get typing and the basics, so I had something there.
So what? So when you finished, it would have been a public school, and then you went to this trade school, and then you went to work.
Well, it was a commercial, very large secondary school, Central Commerce, still in existence. Yeah.
And then, once you graduated there, then you went to work.
I never graduated.
Okay.
I went to grade 11, and then I decided it was enough, so I quit. But when I was out in the work field, I found that I was very limited. So I took night courses, and actually I went to half a day school in the daytime, and I worked half a day.
Oh.
Yeah, and then I decided that I wanted to go to university, so I spoke to my aunt in Detroit, and I couldn't get into university in Canada because it was at that time it was grade 13. But with grade 12, which I had, I completed, I could go to the U.S. So that's how I got to Detroit, Michigan. I stayed with my aunt and cousins.
And what did you do there in terms of schooling?
I enrolled in Wayne University, and I was there 2 years. And found it difficult. Yeah, it was very hard. But I also had a part-time job at Detroit Memorial Hospital. So after 2 years, I found that I was very homesick and decided to come home.
Okay. So then what happened after that?
After that, I went to work at for a film company, because movies were very popular in those days, and that's when I met your father.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Yeah, I met him he knew Bernie Seeger, who was a close friend of his, who worked in the same office that I worked, and he would come quite often for lunch, and we would all go out for lunch, and we sort of got friendly. And then we had a Christmas party, and I went with a date, and during the evening he said to me, if I asked you out, would you go? And I said no, because I thought he meant that night.
Oh.
And here I was with a date.
Right.
But he was persistent, and we started dating.
And so at that time then, was your brother and sister already married at that?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
they were...
Well, my brother got married early, and they had Noreen, my niece. I was 12 when she was born. Oh, what a thrill that was. Walking around, I'm an aunt, I'm an aunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was still in the Army at that time. And then they moved into our house on the second floor. So we had a very big household. When my sister got married, she and her husband moved in also.
Oh, wow.
So I wound up in the attic. My brother, sister-in-law, and 2 kids by this time had the second floor. My mother and father also had one room on the second floor. My sister and her husband had the bedroom on the first floor, and 1 bathroom.
Whoa.
That was a real challenge.
Crazy. Dinner time must have been quite
Well,
busy.
the couple upstairs ate separately, and
They had their own kitchen or whatever?
they had their own kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah, but the bathroom was the major problem, and those little kids were always in the bathroom. Yeah, so we had to, like, if we were getting ready in the morning, we washed up in the kitchen.
Right.
Yeah, so it was quite an
So it's like
adventure, but
quite
we didn't know any different.
Right.
You know, everybody else was doing the same thing.
Mhm, mhm.
Then my sister and Al, her husband, bought a house up on Vaughan and near Eglinton. And they moved out. And eventually my brother and his wife and kids moved out. And then we rented the upstairs to another family.
And then you moved back?
Then I got my bedroom back on the
Okay.
first floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. That was in between the front room, the living room, and the dining room.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
sandwiched in the middle.
Actually, when they bought the house, it was all one room.
Oh, so they
It was an
divided it.
enormous
Yeah, it's
living room,
huge.
and they put in French doors and
Oh.
closed it off
Okay.
and made two rooms.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It was a beautiful
Yeah,
house.
it's gorgeous. It's huge.
Yeah.
Big
A lot of
kitchen, too.
fireplaces because it was an old
Mhm.
house.
Yeah, I remember in the dining room.
Yeah.
And big kitchen.
Yeah, very large
And
kitchen.
a sunroom in the back. And
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So then you started to date Dad,
Yeah.
and how long were you, I guess,
Dating?
courting or whatever
Yeah.
they called it in those days?
About a year. Yeah, he was in real estate, so I didn't get to see him very much because his hours were
Mhm.
extremely long, but we spoke on the phone a lot. And
No cell phones or email at that time?
no.
Yeah.
No,
Just
Yeah.
letters and regular telephone calls?
telephoned. And when I don't know if at that time we had already gotten rid of our party line.
Oh.
But originally, when we had the telephone, we shared the phone line with another family.
Oh, wow.
So
So you had to make sure there were
if you
calls
were
for
bored and you had nothing to do, you'd lift up the phone and listen to someone else's conversation.
Oh, wow. Talk about invasion of privacy.
Yeah, but it was difficult because if you wanted the phone, you couldn't always get it.
And what about friends and stuff like that at that point?
Yeah, there were a lot of kids on my street. And we used to chase after the Iceman,
Oh, the Iceman, huh?
because when I was a kid, we had an ice
Box.
box.
Yeah, not a refrigerator.
Yeah, no, that was before the refrigerator. Yeah. And I do remember a wood stove.
Wow.
Yeah, not well, but I do remember that we had a wood stove. And I remember when we got the refrigerator, that was major.
And what were your parents like as, growing up as, in terms of their
Well,
parenting styles? And
Yeah. Hard to say. They weren't terribly strict, but they were old country.
Mhm.
My mother used to talk to me in Yiddish, and I would answer her in English. And my father worked long hours, but he was home for dinner every night. And he was a very frustrated man. He taught himself how to read, and he would have liked to have done something different and gone further with his education,
Mhm.
but he had to support a family,
Mhm.
and there wasn't that many, and he spoke English fairly well. My mother never learned to read. I offered to teach her, but I think she was embarrassed and she
Mhm.
didn't. She didn't want to do that. And had a happy childhood. There were a lot of kids on the street. We used to play outside a lot.
Did you used to see like the cousins and relatives often?
That was our entertainment. We didn't have money to do anything much. When I was little, we had a car, which my father had to crank to get it started.
Like a Model T kind of
Yeah.
Ford?
Yeah, yeah. And I remember being with him in the car. We had a garage in the back of the house, and they had alleyways that you had to go up to get to the garage. And I was left in the car while my father went to open up the garage doors.
Oh, no.
And of course, I got in the driver's seat and did something, and the car went down the driveway, down the alleyway.
How interesting, because I remember the same story of Randy and I going into the car in the driveway and doing something, and the car going down the driveway into the street.
And across the road.
Yeah, so it's kind of
And
foreshadowing.
we were lucky that there was a driveway opposite us.
Yeah,
Because otherwise you would have been on the grass.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My father was, needless to say, not very
pleased.
happy about that.
The car wasn't damaged or anything?
No, no, he ran after it. It was an old, the car didn't move very far.
Yeah.
Didn't fast. It wasn't fast. So, but I think I remember him chasing me around the house. He didn't catch me,
Yeah.
but he did chase me.
He tried.
But I don't ever remember being hit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So did you, so you mentioned that their siblings were in the States?
Yes,
Would you go
two
to visit
uncles
them, or
were
they
in
come to visit
Brooklyn.
you?
One of them passed away early. He had been in the war and they had used mustard gas.
Mm.
And he suffered a lot with that. He left a wife and 2 children, but they weren't as close for some reason. We didn't have as much connection as the other brother, Uncle Abram,
Mhm.
who we used to go to visit. And because my father worked for Canadian National Railway, we got free passes on the train. One into the heart of the U.S. and a number into Detroit because it was right across the border from Windsor, and it was still considered like a Canadian.
Oh, okay.
So we had multiple passes.
That's great.
Yeah, so we used to go to Brooklyn.
By train?
By train,
Wow.
yeah. And a lot, we went to Detroit a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because it was only 5 hours away.
Right, right. Oh, that's very
Yeah.
good. So then, okay, so we're back, you were dating Dad, and what sorts of things would you do on dates when you go dancing, or?
Yes, there were some wonderful, wonderful nightclubs. Not expensive, huge things, but they had live orchestras,
Mhm.
and they were just delightful. A lot of nice entertainment. Yeah, we did that a lot, and with his friends. We had a group that we went out with. They were already, all his friends were married.
Mhm.
And we would go swimming on weekends. And out for dinners.
So, and then he had a previous marriage, right?
Yes.
And so did you know about that when you started to date?
Yes. I knew that he had been married before, and he had a daughter, who at that time was like a year old.
Hmm.
And he wasn't allowed to see his daughter.
Hmm.
He did see her in the early stages, and we went out together with the little girl
Mhm.
at that time. And then his ex-wife, or his wife, because they weren't quite divorced at that time, was going to be married again, and thought it would be much better for the child if the new husband adopted the child.
So he had to give up his parental
he
rights.
gave up his daughter at that time,
Hmm.
which was a very difficult decision. But, yeah, so she was about 2 at that time. Yeah. And then they went on to have other children. So she was brought up in a reasonably normal
Mhm,
situation and not being dragged around.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Like sort of going back and forth and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So then, where did you get married?
We got married at a hotel down on Front Street on a Saturday night, which was not exactly your typical Jewish
Mhm,
wedding,
mhm.
although they did have a kosher kitchen in this hotel. And the rabbi that we had to walk to
Whoa.
the hotel from his residence because it was still Saturday night.
Mhm.
So our wedding started a little late. But I've always liked things that were different. And this was very different.
Mhm,
But the rest of the was conventional.
mhm, mhm. It was a big wedding, or?
And it was a fairly good size. It was a formal wedding. Yeah, I think there was a couple hundred people, don't recall. But I do remember